Ele é um dos responsáveis pela modernização do Partido Trabalhista inglês e o homem de maior influência nas decisões do governo da Grã-Bretanha. O Roda Viva entrevista esta noite o ministro sem pasta e coordenador político do governo britânico, Peter Mandelson. 44 anos, solteiro, formado em filosofia, política e economia em Oxford, Peter Mandelson é coordenador de campanha do Partido Trabalhista desde 1985. Em 92 se elegeu deputado e em 94 foi líder da oposição no parlamento. Na campanha eleitoral de 96, Peter Mandelson teve atuação de destaque na mudança de discurso do Partido Trabalhista, conquistando eleitores e assegurando a vitória do primeiro-ministro Tony Blair. Essa vitória dos trabalhistas representou, na verdade, a maior derrota já sofrida pelo tradicional Partido Conservador. Para entrevistar o ministro Peter Mandelson, nós convidamos o jornalista Clóvis Rossi, repórter e colunista da Folha de São Paulo, o jornalista Lorival Santana, editorialista do jornal O Estado de São Paulo, o deputado federal Roberto Campos, ex-ministro do Planejamento e ex-embaixador do Brasil em Londres, o economista Eduardo Gianetti, professor da Faculdade de Economia e Administração da Universidade de São Paulo, o publicitário Rui Rodrigues, coordenador de marketing da agência de publicidade DM9 Institucional, o economista Jorge Matoso, professor de economia da Unicamp e coordenador adjunto do programa de governo do Partido dos Trabalhadores do Brasil, e o economista Walter Barelli, ex-ministro do Trabalho e ex-titular da Secretaria de Emprego e Relações do Trabalho no Estado de São Paulo. O programa Roda Viva é transmitido em rede nacional para todos os estados brasileiros e também para Brasília. Hoje, infelizmente, você não vai poder fazer perguntas para o ministro Peter Mandelson, porque este programa foi gravado. O ministro está no Brasil para lançar este livro, que é assinado pelo próprio primeiro-ministro inglês, Tony Blair, Minha Visão da Inglaterra, e é também um dos coautores de um livro chamado A Revolução Blair. Ministro Peter Mandelson, boa noite. A minha primeira pergunta é a seguinte: tanto no livro do primeiro-ministro Blair, como em diversos discursos que eu li do senhor, há uma visão extremamente otimista da Inglaterra, uma visão cor-de-rosa da Grã-Bretanha. Depois de 1 ano e 3 meses de governo, a visão otimista persiste?
Yes, I think the vision is still very strong, and I think that what's important is that people who had doubts about us before we were elected, because after all we had been out of power for 18 years, so it's hardly surprising that people had some doubts and some fears. I think that what's significant is that a year or so on, not only is Tony Blair's vision intact of creating a strong, competitive market economy, but in the context of a society which was stable and strong and united, in which everyone had a stake. That's his vision, and it is as strong as ever, but that people's fears have been put to rest. That we have governed in a competent way, that we have been united in government, that their fears of the old left, of the trade unions and people coming back to take over the government, which all our opponents warned would be the case before the election, none of this has come to pass. So not only is the vision strong, but our popular base is strong too.
Ministro, essa ideia de que os medos foram deixados de lado não combina com uma avaliação muito recente da empresa de consultoria Salomon Smith Barney, segundo a qual o Reino Unido estaria transitando da economia dourada da Europa para o homem doente da Europa, com crescente déficit orçamentário, crescente desemprego, crescimento em queda. Como o senhor responderia a essa avaliação muito recente, publicada segunda-feira nos jornais britânicos?
Because we're passing through into a different stage of the economic cycle, of the business cycle. The key issue for us is as the economy slows down, as inevitably it will because of the cyclical changes in the economy, we make a soft landing rather than a hard landing. And that's what the present government's policies are dedicated to achieving. Over the last decade and a half, the great problem for the British economy is that we have known some very, very good times, times of economic boom, which have then, through economic mismanagement by the government, have turned to bust. And we have experienced, over the last 10.5 years, 2 of the longest, deepest economic recessions of any time in our post-war history. So you can see the importance that we attach to avoiding this familiar pattern of boom and bust, that we even out the highs and the lows in the economy so that we maintain steady economic growth, high employment, continued confidence and investment in the economy over the long term. And so far, I think that our policies have shown success in that aim.
Mas especificamente para evitar a parte negativa do ciclo, ou seja, o bust do ciclo, o que o atual governo tem feito nesta fase em que a economia está no que o senhor chama de soft landing?
The crucial thing is to maintain the stability of the economy, very tight fiscal discipline and prudence in our management of the country's finances. Look, the old option that governments supposedly had of Keynesian demand management, in the modern world, in the global economy of today and the future, it is not open to national governments to sort of pull levers and press buttons and act on their economy in a sort of in an enclosed domestic way, in quite the way that governments once imagined they were able to do. But what they can do in the conduct of policy, of fiscal and monetary policy, is to use a combination of measures that keep inflation low, that maintain stability and confidence in the economy, whilst at the same time, and I think this is very important indeed, doing what responsible governments should do where it's appropriate to intervene in the economy, and that is to make sure that change happens smoothly in the economy, that the economy continues to be equipped properly for the future through investment in infrastructure and communications, but that also individuals in the economy are equipped through high quality education and training and skills. Now that's the sort of dual approach of the government in Britain: economic stability and equipping the economy for the future. It's what I think any sensible modern government does in its economic conduct. It's very similar to the approach which has been taken in Brazil under the government of President Cardoso. It's not a unique phenomenon in Britain. It's what, as I say, sensible modern governments do in the economic age in which we live.
Ministro, dos pontos nos quais o Partido Trabalhista procurou se diferenciar do Partido Conservador era a transparência e a limpeza, ou seja, em contraste com uma história de escândalos de corrupção do governo anterior. Já vimos aí de dois escândalos, um envolvendo diretamente o primeiro-ministro Tony Blair em relação ao financiamento da campanha pela indústria automobilística. E agora, no dia 5, o The Observer publicou uma reportagem mostrando o tráfico de influência no governo. Eu imagino que o senhor tenha boas justificativas para tudo isso, mas eu queria que o senhor filosofasse um pouco sobre se é impossível ter um governo totalmente isento de escândalos.
Well, I think this is a very important issue because we live in an age in which people are increasingly cynical about politics and politicians, where through the activities not just of the media, although they're very good at throwing mud at politicians, but through the actions of politicians themselves, they have tended to break down the trust of people in the political system. And I think it's very important, as Prime Minister Blair said the other day, that our government is purer than pure, whiter than white, because people are so quick to question, so quick to challenge, so quick to suspect and to cast slurs and to express scepticism, that you have to be absolutely rigid and disciplined in the standards that you enforce in government. You've referred to two instances where in the first case over Formula One, the media and our political opponents tried to create the impression that our policy to do with tobacco advertising and its use and its presence in Formula One racing was changed as a result of a financial donation given much earlier on by a leading business person in Formula One racing to the Labour Party. Those two things were completely unconnected. I mean, they were unconnected in time, in practice, in principle, and indeed the claim that we were somehow changing our policy on tobacco advertising as a result of this donation has shown to be untrue, because we now have the strictest, most draconian law throughout Europe, promoted by the British government, introduced during our presidency of the European Union, banning tobacco advertising, which, you know, flies in the face of the business interest of the person who gave the sum of money in the first place. So, you know, not only were the two things unconnected, but we've now seen in the outcome of our policy that we were purer than pure and whiter than white. In the case of the second, that was just sheer nonsense produced in one of the papers who produced very excitable headlines, but then in the print underneath the headline said, but no allegation is being made against any member of the government. No minister or civil servant was involved in any wrongdoing. But you see, what is happening is that the Conservative Party of Britain and some of their supporters in the press, as well as some naive people on the left in the press, are trying to smear us with the same allegations that were proven against our predecessors in office. Proven. I mean, large sums of money changing hands. One Conservative member of Parliament taking money in a brown envelope in return for certain favours. Now, let me tell you, this is almost completely unknown in Britain. We are the least corrupt, most honest, transparent democracy of anywhere in the world. And it was quite exceptional and quite untypical of that Conservative member of Parliament to act in that way. Nonetheless, it happened. And now what they're trying to do is to smear us with the same allegations. It won't wash because it's not true.
Mas, ministro, em relação a esse caso, que presumo no caso do Observer mencionado, uma pessoa chamada Sr. Drake, há uma referência, inclusive, ao senhor, dizendo que os artigos que esse cidadão escrevia para um jornal popular passavam pelo seu crivo e que alguns deles, ou pelo menos um deles, teria sido vetado. Isso é verdade?
Yeah. Well, the newspapers which reported these claims are alleging that non-confidential, uninteresting public press releases of openly made speeches were faxed from my office to a journalist. Quite true. It did happen. It's part of my job to fax press releases about speeches that have been made by members of the government to journalists. It happens all week long. There's nothing exceptional or peculiar about that. But I think what it does show is the desperation of some of these newspapers. They have nothing else to attack the Labour government on. They have no substantive criticism to make of Tony Blair. There's not one area of policy which is being pursued by the Labour government in Britain where they can find substantive fault. So what do? Resort to sort of nonsense and hysterical headlines, whilst at the same time make it absolutely clear that they're not alleging any wrongdoing in the government. So as I say, it's pretty desperate, and it's a one-day wonder. The headlines and stories you referred to faded out of existence after 24 hours.
Senhor Ministro, o senhor, justamente agora, nas perguntas anteriores à questão da corrupção na Inglaterra, o senhor se referiu ao fato de que o programa do Partido Trabalhista Inglês seria semelhante ao programa implementado pelo governo Fernando Henrique Cardoso no Brasil. Ainda lendo suas declarações ontem e publicadas hoje pela imprensa, me pareceram que, além de uma apreciação dessa natureza, o senhor teria feito uma interferência no processo eleitoral, um desrespeito à soberania nacional e demonstrado um relativo desconhecimento da situação brasileira. O Partido dos Trabalhadores, inclusive, enviou hoje uma carta ao senhor embaixador da Inglaterra e uma carta pessoal do candidato Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva ao primeiro-ministro Tony Blair, no sentido de questionar essa interferência e de perguntar se ela representa simplesmente uma opinião pessoal ou uma decisão e uma proposta direta do governo inglês. Inadmissível para um país que defende a sua soberania com muita intensidade.
Yeah. Well, this politics will be played by different people on the political scene in Brazil, and somebody will make some point, and somebody will make another, and somebody will put out a press release. This is of no concern to me because I'm a British politician, I'm not a Brazilian politician. What interests me, though, is something very much more important, and that is the ideas which are prevalent not just in Britain, not just in Europe, but around the world. in this new concept, this new set of ideas, which is loosely described as the third way, a desire to create a framework for a prosperous, competitive, modern economy, and at the same time have a society which is cohesive, which is strong, which is united, which gives each individual citizen a stake in the economic prosperity that is being created. Now, I think these ideas are very important. They're shared by Tony Blair, they're shared by President Cardozo, by Bill Clinton, by Prodi in Italy, by Guterres in Portugal, by Klima in Austria, by Wim Kok in the Netherlands. This is the new consensus which is emerging on the centre-left, and I think there's a very exciting story to be told about how we've left behind the old right-wing politics of Reagan and Thatcher, as well as rejected the out-of-date, old-style state socialism of the old left. We've moved on. Everyone is moving on, and it is a worldwide phenomenon which I think people are talking about more and more, and which I find personally very interesting indeed.
O senhor acha que no Brasil a tendência das forças conservadoras e neoliberais é sempre negar a sua presença ou se travestirem de centro? Ninguém é de direita no Brasil. Tanto assim que hoje grande parte das forças políticas que apoiam e dirigem o governo Fernando Henrique Cardoso correspondem e estiveram presentes nos governos da ditadura militar e em sucessivos governos. Hoje impõe ao país uma determinada política cujos resultados estão aí presentes. Nós temos uma desorganização muito profunda da estrutura produtiva, nós temos as contas externas e internas em condições muito precárias, nós estamos cada vez mais subordinados aos fluxos e aos capitais especulativos, e nós temos taxas de desemprego extraordinárias, nessa cidade mesmo que eu acolho hoje, de cerca de 19%. Como é possível essa política, com esses resultados, serem apresentadas como semelhantes às políticas defendidas por Tony Blair na Inglaterra e que se referem à ajuda aos aposentados, à política de salário mínimo, à interferência e à força que é dada à questão da saúde e da educação, à reinserção, inclusive, no projeto europeu? Como pode-se identificar duas políticas que são tão extremamente opostas e cujos resultados, no caso do Brasil, já são tão conhecidos pela população com as políticas do Tony Blair? O senhor espera que a Inglaterra chegue também a taxas de 19% de desemprego? O senhor espera que as contas externas e as contas externas do governo inglês cheguem às condições presentes no Brasil? O senhor espera que o representante do FMI diga que imediatamente após as eleições se possa realizar um novo ajuste no Brasil?
Yeah. Well, no two countries have exactly the same economic or political or social characteristics. Obviously they don't. They have different histories, they are at different stages of political and economic development. There are different pressures and different tensions in different countries. That's certainly true. But what is also true is that the economic facts of life, of the globalized economy in which we all live, have the same bearing, and they place the same pressures on all our economies and certainly both our countries. And that secondly, the social stresses are very similar. I mean, the necessity to tackle social exclusion, the way in which many people who are denied jobs or proper income, who don't have decent housing, who don't have decent basic education or health care, are excluded from the mainstream of society. Now, the scale of these problems may be different in Brazil than they are in Britain. I'm not disputing that. But I think that what unites us are the goals of policy, the objectives, the political objectives that we have, and the set of ideas that we're bringing to bear on these economic and these social conditions. I think what everyone is searching for in the modern world is an ability to perform, to compete in a modern global economy over which we don't have total control. You know, we have forces, pressures of competitiveness that bear down on each of us, and we have to do the best in maintaining stability of our economy but strengthening the supply side of our economy all the time in order to improve our competitiveness. But exactly the same applies to social issues. All of us want to see a society, a strong civil society, in which individuals have both rights and responsibilities. They have proper access to high-quality education and decent health care, that they're protected from crime, that they have decent housing. These are the objectives of every government that shares values of social justice, of equality of opportunity, of fairness, but values that we know we have to apply in the very challenging and the very harsh conditions of the globalized economy. And that's what we're all searching for. That's what we're all trying to do, whether it be in Brazil or Britain. And the ideas are similar, even though the specific conditions are not identical in each country.
Gostaria de aprofundar a questão do desemprego. Existe hoje uma preocupação universal com o desemprego. Mas se nós examinarmos as estatísticas da economia mundial, nós vamos constatar que a experiência internacional é muito diferenciada. Enquanto nos Estados Unidos hoje a taxa de desemprego é a menor dos últimos 30 anos, na União Europeia o desemprego vem se mantendo alto há muito tempo, na média ficando ao redor de 11% da população economicamente ativa. No entanto, o Reino Unido se destaca dentro do contexto europeu como um país de desemprego baixo, mais parecido com o americano do que com o europeu. Eu faço 3 perguntas em torno dessa questão. Primeiro, como é que o senhor explica o sucesso britânico na questão do emprego, a ponto de ter hoje uma taxa de 6%, ao redor de 6% de desemprego? Em segundo lugar, até que ponto o governo Tony Blair não está se beneficiando de reformas no mercado de trabalho feitas pelo governo conservador, principalmente o liderado por Margaret Thatcher? E, em terceiro lugar, que lições o senhor tiraria da experiência britânica para outros países?
Well, all your 3 questions point to the same answer. And that is, and I shall say to you honestly, as a Labour Party politician, that certain of the economic reforms that were carried out in Britain during the 1980s, when Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister, were good. They were necessary. I mean, the British economy in previous decades had become unenterprising. There was inadequate emphasis on entrepreneurial activity, on rewarding individual effort. Our labour market had become too inflexible. Our trade unions, actually, in many aspects of their behaviour, were becoming a barrier to growth rather than a supporter of employment creation. Now, the changes that took place in Britain in the 1980s were, as I say, good and welcome. They've actually become the envy of other nations in Europe who have had to catch up and have come rather late, later than Britain that is, to recognising the need for liberalising their economy, for making their labour markets more flexible, and to taking away those barriers to growth, those burdens on business and those high social costs, which have, it is true, impeded the economies in Europe, certainly in contrast, as your question suggested, to the United States, whose economy is a sort of giant job-creating machine. But the point I would make to you also is this, and it's very important for you with respect to understand this, that whilst Mrs. Thatcher was successful in certain respects in liberating the British economy, and while she was right to seek to transform the performance of the British economy, she failed to take into account 2 things. One, the role of a modern government in supporting firms and enterprises, supporting the business community by investing in education and training and economic infrastructure. She didn't attach importance to these things. She didn't attach the necessary premium that any modern industrialized country needs to do to basic education and to continuing education throughout life. She just didn't think that was important enough. The second thing she didn't attach the right importance to was the need to keep a united, stable society. You know, for her, what was important was efficiency. And she thought that the enemy of efficiency was compassion, caring, that you couldn't have the 2 working together. Now, the philosophy of Tony Blair, you know, the ideas of the third way, rejects that you have to make a choice between efficiency on the one hand and compassion and caring in society on the other. That is a false choice. It is a very silly, simplistic choice. You can have both things if you pursue the sensible policies of the political centre and of the third way. And that is exactly what Tony Blair is doing in Britain.
Mais especificamente, no caso do mercado de trabalho, o que é que fez a diferença? Quais foram as reformas que realmente permitiram à Grã-Bretanha melhorar tanto a sua posição na capacidade de diminuir o desemprego?
The main changes were that the trade unions, who have and continue to enjoy the right to organise, to be recognised, certainly under the new Labour government, because we're changing the law so that it's more favourable to the trade unions, nonetheless cannot take the obstructive, mass, sometimes violent action against employers that became a feature through mass strikes and high levels of industrial action taken against employers that became a feature of the British economy in the 1960s and the 1970s. Let me give you a very simple example of what I mean. You know, in those days, trade unions didn't have to have ballots of their members to decide whether industrial action should be taken. Very often it was left to a handful of trade union leaders or local militants at places of work to decide whether industrial action should be taken, that employers should be blocked, that management should be prevented from managing in a flexible way. Now, the reason why this is so important is because in the global economy, you have to respond to change. You cannot stand with your hands up and say, no change, we stay as we are. We like the status quo. And imagine that in doing that, you're protecting jobs. You're not. You're saying goodbye to jobs. You're saying goodbye to the flexibility that you need in order to compete in the modern economy. Now that's why those changes had to take place. That's why we had to introduce greater flexibility in our labour market. But it was always flexibility, as far as we're concerned. It should be flexibility plus investment in education and training, plus investment in research and development in the economy, plus investment in new technology. Then there is a role for active government in supporting the economy and strengthening our supply side. But you need at the same time flexibility, an end to these restrictive practices that too often were practiced by the trade unions and others in the British economy, which was holding us back in those days. So there has to be a balance.
Ministro, a questão é da participação dos sindicatos. A organização sindical sempre foi fundamental, ela foi fundamental para a criação do próprio Partido Trabalhista. Nenhum sindicalista faz parte hoje do gabinete. Então, em que medida se dá essa participação dos sindicatos num governo trabalhista? Estão presentes no alto escalão ou eles estão fazendo uma mediação entre o governo e os trabalhadores?
We have a good relationship with the trade unions, but it's a proper, appropriate relationship. It's one in which we listen to the trade union viewpoint. We hear what they have to say in the priorities that they want devoted to employment, to education, to health care and other public services. We listen to them too in what they have to say about the management of the economy. Indeed, about their own affairs and how the law should relate to trade union organisation. But whereas in previous years, in previous eras when Labour was last in power, we had the sort of trade unions in government with us, you know, sitting alongside us, you know, waving a finger at the ministers, laying down the law often, essentially assuming a political and a governmental role which was inappropriate for the trade unions. Whereas we had that in those days, in the 1970s, in the 60s, now we listen, we take their interests into account, but we listen to other people as well, other interests in the economy. And at the end of the day, the government makes up its own mind about where the national interest lies, where the public interest lies. And this means that the trade unions, yes, in some cases, feel that they don't have enough, clout. They feel slightly rejected and frozen out. Well, this is an understandable reaction by the trade unions who, amongst those who remember the privileges and favours they had in previous years, but for most people in the trade unions in Britain, they think this is the right way to behave now. They think it's right that the trade unions have a very strong and articulate voice, but it's a voice which is being expressed to government rather than seeking to get into government and seeking to control the actions of ministers. And I think this separation of powers, of responsibility, this distance is an appropriate development to have taken place, because if not, if you have the trade unions representing too big an influence, you have the consequence that they represent a vested interest, that they are protecting certain interests which are in conflict with those of the public as a whole. Now, it's separating those interests, which is the government's job. The government's job is to listen and then to make up its own mind and then govern in the national interest, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Em primeiro lugar, gostaria de felicitar o ministro Mandelson pela sua contribuição para a modernização do velho trabalhismo inglês. Em seguida, farei um comentário e depois formularei uma pergunta. O comentário é que a expressão terceira via, frequentemente usada pelo primeiro-ministro Blair, tem má tradição na América Latina. Já houve várias tentativas de terceira via. Perón tinha o seu justicialismo, que era uma terceira via. Allende tinha o allendismo no Chile, que era uma terceira via. E havia a via peruana do general Alvarado. O resultado dessas terceiras vias é que não foram nem capitalismo, nem socialismo, foram apenas populismo. De modo que hoje, quando eu ouço a expressão terceira via, eu me lembro da afirmativa do primeiro-ministro tchecoslovaco, pós-comunista, Václav Klaus, que dizia que a terceira via é o caminho mais curto para o terceiro mundo. E eu, pessoalmente, costumo definir terceira via como sendo a busca de um capitalismo sem lucro, de um socialismo sem disciplina e de investimentos estrangeiros sem investidores. Mas agora vamos à pergunta concreta. Não será a Inglaterra prejudicada por não ter aderido prontamente à moeda única, postergando a decisão, talvez para um futuro parlamento e após um plebiscito? Há uma visão otimista e pessimista desse comportamento. A visão pessimista é que a Inglaterra perde a capacidade de influenciar a política monetária europeia e que os custos de transação ficarão mais altos no mercado bursátil inglês. A visão otimista é que a Inglaterra não será prejudicada, pode até ser favorecida, porque os europeus têm uma mania regulamentar muito severa, são interventores em matéria de regulamentos de bolsa, e a bolsa inglesa tem uma tradição bastante livre. O ministro se filia à visão otimista, à visão pessimista, e quais as razões para isso?
Well, before I answer your question about the European currency, let me first make a comment on your comment. And it's a very simple comment. I think that the third way would not be a route to the third world, being pursued by Bill Clinton of the United States. He has no intention of America becoming a third world country. Prime Minister Blair, he has no intention of Britain becoming a third world country. And I could go through you, head of government after head of government, European country after European country, all of whom are following the same ideas and programme of the third way, because they know that that is the sensible, modern way in which you can both create economic stability and prosperity and a united society, and a cohesive society, as we approach the 21st century. It is a very distinctive left-of-centre project for governance in the next century. And I think that the fact that it has such champions and such supporters, and not simply President Cardoso in Brazil, is testimony to the strength and the appeal and the relevance of those ideas. Let me, though, answer your question about the single currency by saying this. In principle, I think the single currency is a good idea. You know, we have a very large and a very successful single market which covers the entirety of the European Union era. That's 370 million people. It would strengthen the single market. It would increase the potential, the economic potential of the single market. It's a natural extension of the single market if we were to have a single currency. It would be anti-inflationary. It would help to keep interest rates down. It would reduce the transaction costs in our trading, and it would make it cheaper for people to travel to other countries as they want to do. So in principle, in theory, we support the single currency. But Britain, nonetheless, will not be entering it in the first instance, in the first wave, because we are at a different stage in our economic, our business cycle from the other continental European countries. Our interest rates are higher, they're not in sync with those of the continental European countries. I believe that through the policies that we're pursuing in Britain, this will create a convergence of our economy with that of the continental European countries, which will create the possibility of our joining the European single currency early on in the next century, in a few years to come. But when we take that decision, it will be based not on theory, not on politics, not because we believe in some sort of glorious European social state. We will take that decision because we think it's in the national economic interests of Britain to do so, and if we so decide, we will then put the decision to the British people for them to decide in a referendum.
Mr. Mandelson, uma curiosidade, só uma continuidade. Na sua longa lista de líderes que seguem as ideias da Terceira Via, o senhor não mencionou o primeiro-ministro francês Lionel Jospin. Mencionou, inclusive, algumas personalidades que são menos notórias. Em França. E o senhor não o considera digamos, adepto da Terceira Via? Por que a omissão?
Well, I personally do, and all the contacts I have with the French government and the French Socialist Party and their actions in government and their record since they came to power in the last year suggest that they share the same values, the same political outlook, as well as the same pragmatism when it comes to applying those values to their programme in government. But of course the situation is slightly complicated in France because you have a system of cohabitation. You have two parties, two leaders cohabiting in the same government. So it's not quite as simple with President Chirac on the one hand and Prime Minister Jospin on the other. But certainly the relations and the dialogue between Jospin and Blair are very good and very strong. Indeed, only in the next few days, Mr. Jospin is coming to Britain. He's coming informally to spend a day talking and relaxing with Tony Blair in his constituency in the north of Britain. So our relations are good, and I think that the experience of the French government will bear out that the prevalent political ideas as we enter the next century are those of the centre-left, of the third way.
Ok. Eu gostaria de voltar ao tema dos sindicatos e do emprego. O senhor foi consultor da Central Sindical Inglesa, né? Conhece bem o assunto. E aqui o governo brasileiro, o governo Fernando Henrique Cardoso, os governos estaduais que seguem essa orientação, têm investido muito no que se refere à questão do emprego, primeiro numa participação da sociedade no problema do emprego. Então, temos comissões municipais de emprego com empresários, trabalhadores e governo. Um outro grande programa que o governo Fernando Henrique vem fazendo é um programa de qualificação profissional. Já mais de 1 milhão de trabalhadores desempregados participaram de cursos profissionalizantes. E uma outra linha é investir bastante na criação de novos empreendedores, a partir das micro e pequenas empresas ou formas cooperativas entre pessoas para buscar no autoemprego a saída de um problema que afeta o mundo todo. Eu gostaria de ter seus comentários a respeito disso que está sendo feito no Brasil, confrontando com o que o novo trabalhismo está fazendo na Inglaterra.
Well, the approach and the ideas, the policies, are almost identical between those in Brazil being pursued by Mr. Cardoso's government and those in Britain being pursued by Tony Blair. They're almost identical. And I tell you why they are almost identical, because they are inevitable. You know? They are inevitable in the sense that governments in this day and age can't go out and create work instead of enterprises. We cannot do the job of businesses and the private sector, but what we can do is to support those enterprises in their investment and in their creation of employment. We can create a framework of inflation, of low inflation and of stability, in which gives confidence to enterprises and business leaders to invest and to plan for the future. There is, in other words, a modern partnership between government and business, which has become typical, which has become the norm in most of the intelligent centre and centre-left governments throughout the world. But one thing that governments can't do and shouldn't do, and one thing that trade unions have to accept, is that it's not the job of governments to create employment in the public sector where there's no work actually to be done, to create phantom jobs, ghost jobs, where you're just spending an enormous amount of money, not on those public services which are so needed by the public, but keeping people in jobs that don't really exist. That is nonsensical, and it should end. But equally, there's no point in governments or trade unions standing out against change in markets, in products, in technologies, even though those changes will have an impact on employment and in some cases will create unemployment. But you're not going to protect those jobs forever by closing your eyes to inevitable change in the economy. You will only create jobs in the long term and support employment in the long term if you recognise that change is inevitable and then manage it sensibly in an intelligent way. And that's the approach that I see both with the government being pursued both by the government in Brazil and by Tony Blair's government in Britain.
Eu queria abordar aí um pouco de um ponto que o senhor menciona em diversos dos seus textos como sendo uma parte muito importante do ato de governar, que é a questão da comunicação. Há um texto em que o senhor, inclusive, desmonta a visão tradicionalmente atribuída à Grã-Bretanha, que é de um país de cerveja quente, um país de grandes campos de cricket e de soldados com altos caps, ônibus vermelhos, e há toda uma nova visão, o que o senhor chama de um novo sonho britânico. Minha pergunta é a seguinte: se é que dá para mensurar isso, quantos por cento do esforço desse governo trabalhista inglês novo é comunicação e quanto é efetiva realidade? Porque o que passa a sensação é de que, do ponto de vista da comunicação, são extremamente competentes.
Well, we're geared towards communications because we think it's an essential part of policy making and governing. I mean, to govern is to choose, but to govern is also to communicate. And it's very important, we think, that all the time the public understand and have a realistic picture, the big picture of what the government is doing, so that with all the daily events that come in and out and the headlines that come in and out of the newspapers and the gossip and the tittle-tattle that goes on, all the time people have alongside that a clear communication from the government of what we're trying to do in economic and social and international policies. And I think that is very important. But the other reason is this, that we want to present to the rest of the world an image of Britain which is modern, which is up to date, which is outward-looking to the rest of the world with whom we're trying to trade and to do business, and which is looking forwards into the next century, not looking sort of backwards at eras which have come and gone. That's not to say that we don't like the village greens and the countryside and the traditional pictures of Britain. Those are a traditional picture of Britain. They are our heritage. But they're not the only story about Britain. There is a story of our heritage, yes, of our Queen, and of our Parliament, and all our pageantry, and all our pomp, and all the other things that we're famous for. But as well as that, we want to be at the cutting edge of design, of new technology, producing new markets for the new products, for the expanding markets around the world. We want to be seen as a nation which combines both tradition, in other words, but also a nation which is also state-of-the-art and up-to-date.
Agora, isso é fácil de fazer numa campanha política. Isso é fácil de fazer numa agremiação que tem um comando único, né, como uma campanha política, por exemplo. No governo é muito mais difícil.
Yeah, actually, it's hard to do at all times, whether in the campaign or otherwise, because it's creating a picture of the country and of what the government is doing, which is the ideal from our point of view. And of course all our political opponents and the media spend all their time knocking it and trying to sort of colour it in different ways and pulling threads in it and sort of making the sort of roof sort of cave in over it. And so in a sense communications all the time is a sort of struggle between how you see yourself and your country, what you stand for, what you want others to understand by being British or by being New Labour or being Third Way, a struggle between that and how others would like to present you, usually sort of differently and negatively. And it's the same for every government in every country, in all parts of the world.
Ministro, okay. Ministro, eu gostaria de perguntar sobre esse tema também. Aqui no Brasil há uma grande dificuldade. Os governos que estão se apresentando para a reeleição, os seus partidários, né, dizem que não se comunicaram muito bem, né? Não houve envolvimento grande dos governos com a comunicação.
It's a good excuse.
Ok, é uma desculpa, mas a ideia é outra. Sempre que se faz o uso da comunicação, muitas vezes se usa os meios de comunicação e aí há uma propaganda paga. E há sempre ataques aos governos que usam recursos em comunicação. Seria interessante verificar, na Inglaterra, aproximadamente quanto do orçamento, ou que parcela é aplicada em comunicação. Como os meios de comunicação...
By the government or by the party?
Pelo governo, sobre as atividades. Ou é o partido que paga. Aqui o partido não faz muitas comunicações pagas, né? Tem um espaço na televisão em determinados momentos, de acordo com a lei. Agora, a comunicação durante todo o exercício do mandato, ela sofre muitas críticas, porque sempre é considerada como não um direito do cidadão ser informado, mas como uma forma de dar a versão oficial do fato e não a verdade. Ou promoção governamental. Como o senhor vê isso? Quanto se ganha, se gasta nessa parte? E uma outra última questão é, os meios de comunicação normalmente publicam os releases que o senhor encaminha para as redes de televisão e jornais?
Well, I think that the important principles in this area are these. First of all, we don't want to go like America, where millions and millions of dollars are raised every year by politicians in order to buy TV commercials and airtime in order to sort of slug it out, one against the other, with a constant sort of artillery battle of TV advertisements and radio commercials, which means that the politicians are involved to an enormous extent in fundraising, which I think is corrupting of the political process, but also diverting their energy away from debate, from proper articulation and presentation of political arguments and policies, into cheap 30-second commercials. So we don't want to go the American way. We're certainly not in Britain, and I don't think you're going that way in Brazil. As far as the government is concerned, we have to observe a very scrupulous distinction between what the government is presenting as official information, which are facts about what the government is doing and in the implementation of its policies on the one hand, and on the other, a political slant, a political spin, if you like, which is misusing government resources and misusing the government machine in order to assist ministers politically for their re-election or whatever, rather than projecting and offering an objective statement of the facts. Now, we don't have that in Britain. I see no evidence of that happening in Brazil. But we have to be very scrupulous. You know, we have to be vigilant all the time that official government information is not being misused, and that the media, you know, the free media, you know, newspapers, television and radio, like this program we're involved in at the moment, is independent. That it has integrity in terms of its journalism, that it may be owned by one individual or one business or one agency of the government or the other, but that they separate the ownership from the journalism. The journalism must remain honest and factual and objective. Because the reason that's important is because information is the lifeblood of democracy. Free information, information that the public can trust, and that's what's essential in a strong democracy.
Jorge, ministro.
Eu queria colocar para o ministro novamente, retomar a questão da terceira via. A discussão sobre a terceira via inglesa eu acho extremamente importante e ela nos permite recolocar a importância da discussão sobre diferentes vias entre, digamos, dois polos que estariam hoje questionados, entre o mercado todo livre, todo poderoso, e um Estado todo poderoso e nem sempre livre. Então, entre essas duas dicotomias, no entanto, me parece que existem múltiplas vias. Né? Múltiplas vias que representam não só países diferentes, mas interesses muitas vezes diferentes. Nós temos, por exemplo, o Mercosul, nós temos o NAFTA. Nem sempre os interesses brasileiros são idênticos aos interesses americanos. Nós temos hoje diferenças com relação ao ALCA. A Europa, muitas vezes, tem diferenças com relação à posição insular que os governos ingleses anteriores tiveram de rechaço ao ingresso da Inglaterra num projeto, digamos, de moeda única, sobretudo. Então, nesse sentido, me parece que a discussão não tanto centrada sobre como se nós tivéssemos uma única saída e uma única via, quando se apresentam para os povos ainda diferentes oportunidades. Tanto assim que o governo francês, por exemplo, tem uma postura diferente com relação ao governo inglês relativamente ao emprego. Ele tem uma proposta que está sendo encaminhada já de redução de jornada de trabalho de 35 horas. O governo francês tem políticas diferenciadas com relação a outras atividades. E isso é normal. São diferentes interesses, diferentes formas de encaminhar a realidade. Me parece, e aí que eu faço a pergunta, no sentido, é possível de se pensar numa única via?
But I think you're making a very important point here. The important point is that we do not describe the third way as a rigid dogma. You know, it is not an ideology which is sort of set out in tablets of stone and handed down to everyone and say, right, here is the Holy Writ, you must follow by the letter everything that is stated here in these tablets.
Isso é bom, mas não é o que parece. O senhor sempre está se referindo como essa é a via da modernidade,
como inevitável.
Esta é a via inevitável, esta é a via que segue tais e tais países, essa é a mesma via da Inglaterra e do Brasil, como se nós fôssemos a Inglaterra. Nós não somos uma ilha, nós somos um país continental com 160 milhões de habitantes que temos que defender a nossa indústria e temos que buscar referências nacionais.
What we are, whether it be Brazil or Britain, are people who are making their way in a one globalized economy. And that is the difference, that we do not have, we can't just construct barriers, around our borders and say, we are what we are. We will produce what we wish, make do with what we produce, and that trade is unnecessary, that investment is unnecessary, that capital formation from different sources are different. All this is from an ideal past era, which actually didn't even exist when it was supposed to be ideal. But I do think that when we talk about the third way, we're talking about a framework. We're talking about a set of ideas. We're not talking about a rigid dogma. So that you're right. When you refer to France, it's true. The French government, under Lionel Jospin, have introduced a law which seeks to reduce working hours to 35 a week. Now, it happens to be the case that there are all sorts of qualifications and loopholes and various ways in which that policy isn't quite as, how can I put it, quite what it seems. It's not quite as sort of, rigid as it might appear when it's first heard about. But nonetheless, it is an idea, it is a policy rather, which the Labour government in Britain is not adopting. We don't think it's practical. We don't think it's realistic. I think we are in the majority of governments rather than the minority. But can I also make a last and very important point about your observation? And it arises from an excellent discussion I had when I was in Brasilia with the governor of the federal district of Brasilia, who is a member, I think, of the PT party. And he made a similar point. He said, well, you talk about the third way, Peter, but I have another way of looking at it. I call it the other way, or the alternative way. And I said, well, fine, what is the other way? What is the alternative way? And he described it to me, and to be perfectly honest, it was very similar to what Mr. Blair believes in, or actually, what President Cardoso is following in Brazil. Now, I don't think we should get sort of hung up on labels or categories. I'm not seeking to put people into rigid compartments and say, right, there are these walls and you're in that area and somebody else in that. Of course there is going to be a flow between people. What unites us on the centre left, whether we be more centrist or more leftist, what unites us are certain values, our belief in fairness, in social justice, in equality of opportunity, in creating a society in which everyone has the best chance to make the most of themselves, where we take away the barriers that hold people back from fulfilling their potential. Now, those are the values that unite the left, whether it be the left or the centre-left or whatever. But within that, there will be plenty of room for a different emphasis on policies, different organisation of our party, and also the different rhetoric that people employ. But I just offer you, again, as an example of how blurred these lines can become from my discussion in Brasilia with the federal governor, who I had much more in common with, from my perspective, as somebody on the centre-left who supports Blair, than I would have with somebody on the right of the political spectrum.
Mr. Mandelson, esse framework, essa moldura de terceira via não é demasiadamente frouxa, porque falar em justiça social, desde a extrema-direita até a extrema-esquerda, pelo menos retoricamente, todos falam. Ninguém tem a coragem de vir a público e dizer eu sou contra a coesão social. E esses conceitos aqui, de certa maneira, constituem embasamento da terceira via, o senhor não acha que são ainda demasiado frouxos, difíceis de se venderem no bom sentido à opinião pública?
I don't think so, because they are ideas, because they are a framework. I mean, when you come down to practical policies, I shall offer you some practical policies, which I call third way policies, equipping the economy and equipping individuals for change in the economy so that they can improve their employability. That's not job creation, but it is creating the chance to become employed in a modern economy. That means investment in education and training and skills. I offer you another example. First-class, decent public services, not money poured into the bureaucracy of the state, wasted in public services, siphoned off into old-style practices and behaviour that has nothing to do with the services that are needed by the public, has nothing to do with accountability to the consumers amongst the public, but everything to do with the self-interest of those who work in the public sector. Now, we reject that. We believe in decent public services, but we also believe in reforming those public services and making them truly efficient rather than wasteful. And it means putting the money that we have into the standards and delivery of those services, not into the employment and restrictive practices of those who work in the public sector. Let me give you another practical example of how we govern ourselves. We can either be authoritarian, centralist governments, where all the decisions are pulled towards the centre and taken at the highest level and then passed down to the public and told, you will accept this, you will do that, you will take this policy, you will behave in this way. Or you can decentralise government. You can take decisions down to the states, to the municipalities, to local communities, and in the process involve individuals in the policies that are being formulated, involve individuals in the public services and how they are delivered, so that they have a sense of control over what is being done for them and in their name. Now, these practical changes of reforming, of modernising the way in which we live, modernising the state structure so as to turn away from the bureaucracy and the waste that has infested too many public services in the past, turning away either from the sort of do-nothing, laissez-faire policies of, the markets are God, let the markets rip without any influence or any accountability of the markets to the wider public interest. No, we believe that for example, when enterprises are privatised and they have a strong commercial discipline, new investment, new resources invested in them, as well as an improvement in efficiency and performance of those services, we also believe that they should be properly regulated by the government on behalf of the people. Now, these are practical ways in which we can reject both the old-style, state-owning, state-dominating, old-style left attitudes of the past, but also the uncaring, crude, individualistic attitudes and approaches of the conservative right. It is in rejecting both those things and finding a modern, reformed way for government to act in partnership with the private sector, for public services to be properly invested in, but also efficiently run, for a welfare system that does help individuals, that does invest in basic education, that does fulfill rights for the individual, but also expects some responsibilities being exercised by those individuals in return. There's give and take. Now, in all these ways, these are modern ways of approaching, modern ideas for governing our countries. And I think, as I say, they are the prevailing ideas. They are the prevailing views around the world. They are in the ascendancy, and the old ideological left and the old ideological right are behind us.
Ministro, na prática, a verdade é que é muito difícil distinguir os discursos de duas correntes dominantes em todos os países avançados. O Partido Conservador pode acusar o Partido Trabalhista de ter se aproximado dele no seu giro que fez em 94. Assim como Bill Clinton, o que fez foi se aproximar muito da plataforma dos republicanos. O senhor não acha que, no fundo, o Blair hoje poderia repetir, só que invertendo a frase que ele falou em 94, de que, na verdade, nós não temos perdido não são os conservadores que têm ganho 4 eleições, e sim os trabalhistas que têm perdido 4 eleições. Será que não foram os conservadores agora que perderam uma eleição, na verdade? Tinham vários problemas, tinham escândalos, tinham o desgaste de estar quase 2 décadas no poder, tinham a confusão em relação à União Europeia também. Por que os senhores ganharam a eleição com um discurso tão próximo dos conservadores?
Yeah. But I tell you who has lost. The conservative right have lost. Their values have been defeated, their record in government, which in the end turned out to be ultimately hollow, narrow, unrealistic, impractical in the modern world and the modern economy. And their individual politicians have been defeated because they became complacent and sleazy. All those have been defeated. But what has also been defeated is the old-style left, the old ideologues, who employ the rhetoric of communism and Eastern Europe, who think that state ownership is a good in itself, without asking whether that state ownership is providing the services and using the resources and taking the decisions on behalf of the public, which is truly in their interests. The old left, who believed that whatever trade unions said was right, irrespective of whether those views represented the grassroots of the trade unions rather than simply the attitudes of the leadership. Now, all those old ideologies, those old practices, those old styles of behaviour, the old politics, that is what has been defeated. And I think it's what people want. People no longer want to make simplistic choices, but are you in favour of bosses or are you in favour of workers? Actually, you can be in favour of both if you pursue sensible policies. Policies that support enterprise and entrepreneurialism, but also respect workers and give rights to the trade unions. These two things are not incompatible. People try to force you to make a choice between low taxes or high spending. Well, you can have sensible, moderate taxes and public spending, which is careful, which is prudent, which is wise spending. You don't any longer have to make these artificial choices. And I think the people who know this most of all are the voters, are the public. They're much more realistic. They're much more intelligent than some politicians give them credit for. They don't want to make these silly, crude, simplistic choices. They know the world is more complicated. They want a more sophisticated response to the real world. And I tell you this, voters in every country will follow political leaders who are bringing honesty, realism, and sophistication to the very difficult choices and the difficult challenges that we all experience in the modern age. The politicians of the future are the honest sophisticates rather than the crude populists, whether they be of the right or the left.
Diana.
Eu gostaria de trazer a discussão para um plano mais específico de políticas, porque aí é que as diferenças ideológicas aparecem. Eu entendo que um valor central do novo trabalhismo é a igualdade de oportunidades. E uma das maneiras de promover esse valor é a educação básica de qualidade para todos. No entanto, alguns problemas aparecem quando nós buscamos uma educação básica de qualidade. Eu gostaria de trazer dois problemas e ouvir a sua posição. Primeiro, a questão dos testes para aferir a qualidade de ensino. Eu me recordo, na Inglaterra, a resistência que houve por parte dos professores quando o governo conservador introduziu testes para implementar o controle de qualidade
And from
de
some in
ensino.
the Labour Party. And from some in the Labour Party.
Perfeito. Então, os testes finalmente foram implementados. Entendo que estão sendo implementados. Eu gostaria de saber se o New Labour aceitou finalmente a ideia de que é preciso um teste para medir, aferir a qualidade do ensino básico que está sendo oferecido à população.
Yeah.
Uma pergunta. Uma segunda pergunta é um fato que aparece da experiência internacional e eu colhi, inclusive, uma evidência sobre a Inglaterra que eu gostaria de ouvir a sua opinião. Uma pesquisa feita na Inglaterra, isso apareceu na revista The Economist, pesquisa feita na Inglaterra com crianças nascidas em 1958 mostra que a sua chance de ingressar na universidade cai pela metade quando os pais vivem separados. Ou seja, há uma enorme correlação, uma forte correlação entre estrutura familiar e desempenho escolar. Como é que New Labour entende o problema da família na sua ligação com o desempenho escolar? Primeiro, como explicar esse fato? E segundo, existe alguma política de governo em relação à desigualdade que é para uma criança estar numa família desestruturada?
Well, first of all, your question about tests. We were wrong to oppose testing in schools. And what motivated us in opposing that, just as we opposed the league tables to show how schools were performing and whether they were attaining certain standards, is because we were thinking too much of the producers rather than the consumers of education. The consumers of education, the children, the pupils at school and their parents, they want incentives, they want discipline, they also want good equipment and books and high quality teachers, but they want to see how their children are performing. They want to create benchmarks against which the schools and the teachers can be judged. But we, in the Labour Party, put ourselves on the side of the teachers who were resistant to this testing, resistant to examining the standards and performance and the attainment levels in the schools, because they were being protective of themselves rather than thinking of the pupils. Now, that is perhaps a slight unfair generalization about the teaching profession, but as a general observation, it was true. And so that what we are doing now is not only maintaining the testing, we are also saying to the schools, we will give you a lot of freedom to run your own affairs, to manage your resources, how your money is spent, your hiring and firing of teachers. We will give you all the freedom that we possibly can to use schools to perform. So in a sense, that is the carrot that we're offering. But at the same time, we're saying, if you fall below the standards that we expect, if you betray the pupils who are in your care, then we will come down very hard on you. And we will say, why is this school failing? Why are you not achieving these standards? Why are these children not passing their tests? Is it because the teachers are bad teachers? Is it because the teachers should no longer be teachers? Is it because the head teachers are poor head teachers and not giving good leadership? In which case, perhaps the teachers should be fired, and perhaps the head teachers should be replaced, or perhaps the school should be closed down altogether and set up again. Because what's important is the interest of the pupils, not the educational bureaucrats, not the teachers and the teaching unions, and not the politicians who simply want to sort of shout about success. Now that's hard medicine. That is hard medicine. But it's important, and we encounter resistance, of course, and the teaching unions scream at us. You know, yell, all the time. But I'm sorry, it's what the schools need, because it's what the pupils deserve, and that's what we're going to continue doing. Now, what was your second question?
Família.
Just remind me about the family. That, I think, is such an important issue for this reason. Many young people fail at school because they don't have the support in their homes. Many young people don't have the discipline from their families, sometimes because their families are experiencing very high stress and pressure from unemployment or poverty or bad housing, or because there is a separation or divorce between the parents, and the casualties are the children in many cases. Now, we want to do the following. We want to create a much better, stronger relationship between the schools and the parents. In the past, the schools have said, education is our business. Teaching is what we know about. Parents keep out. You keep at home. Now, we don't think that's right. We think there should be a partnership between the parents and the schools and a joint approach to the teaching and the education of children. Secondly, we are developing policies of financial support for families and for children. We are also creating a national strategy for childcare so that parents can both work and be good parents at the same time, rather than having to make a choice between the two, as a result of which oftentimes the children have been the losers. And last of all, we are trying to develop ways in which those individuals and those families who are most at risk of being excluded from society are brought back into the mainstream of society. Oftentimes it's individuals or groups, or it's neighborhoods And we want to find ways of addressing the joined up problems of those individuals and their families by responding by government with joined up solutions. Oftentimes government does one thing with one hand, another with the other hand. They don't talk to each other, they don't share experience, they don't learn from what they've been doing. That's wrong. We've got to find better ways of targeting government help directly to individuals who are excluded from society, but we've got to do so in a more intelligent way than we have done in the past.
Só complemento rapidinho. O que acontece com uma criança na Inglaterra se descobre que ela não está frequentando a escola? O que acontece? O Estado intervém de alguma maneira?
Yes, yes. And it's been the first report, which was prepared for Prime Minister Blair by the new social exclusion unit that he created in government, was on truancy from school and school exclusion. It's a big, big issue, because very often children, when they start not attending school, they get into bad company. They start engaging in antisocial behaviour. They look to drugs, and then they start committing crime in order to pay for their drug habit. And we are creating new policies and providing financial incentives to schools to take these children back into schools, possibly not the school from which they were originally playing truant or from which they were originally excluded, but other schools and other ways back into the education system, which is more tailored to the needs and behavioural pattern of those individual pupils.
Ministro, o deputado Roberto Campos tinha solicitado, em seguida você vai.
Senhor ministro, os liberais como eu, que prezam os valores capitalistas, se sentem vítimas de uma injustiça histórica. Com a vitória de vários governos de centro-esquerda, a chamada onda rosa, o que acontece é que governos se apresentam simpaticamente como capazes de embelezar a casa. Mas isso é possível se antes alguém pôs ordem na casa. Todos os líderes citados como eventuais parceiros da Terceira Via, Clinton, Blair, Jospin, Guterres de Portugal, todos eles se beneficiaram de governos que os precederam e que fizeram, por assim dizer, o trabalho sujo de disciplina monetária e fiscal e de desregulamentação trabalhista. Só 2 governos dentre os citados não tiveram esse benefício prévio de arranjo da casa por métodos de eficiência competitiva capitalista. Prodi, na Itália, que teve que fazer ao mesmo tempo os 2 serviços, arrumar a casa e embelezá-la, e Fernando Henrique, que está tentando fazer os 2 serviços e ainda não concluiu nenhum. Minha pergunta, então, senhor ministro, é ou não uma injustiça histórica?
Who's the other example? You said there were 2 leaders.
Fernando Henrique Cardoso. Here. Minha pergunta é, então, será aceitável a proposição de que a terceira via só não leva ao terceiro mundo se ela é praticada em países que, antes de fazer o embelezamento socialista da casa, fizeram as reformas básicas baseadas na eficiência competitiva do capitalismo?
But your examples of Prodi's Italy and Cardozo's Brazil defeat your argument. I mean, there are 2 examples where they didn't have, as you call it, the dirty work done before them. They didn't have the benefit of other reforms undertaken by previous administrations. They're having to do everything. They're both having to develop the ideas, be elected, see through the reforms, and then be re-elected. I mean, that is a tall order, and we will see what happens on that basis here in Brazil in the autumn. But I think that, in a sense, if I can say this with respect, you're trying to have your cake and you're trying to eat it at the same time, to use an English expression.
Havia aqui ministro que falava muito isso. Não bem nessa mesma maneira. Exatamente ao contrário.
Yeah. Well, but the meaning is the same, whether it be in Britain or Brazil. You're saying that basically what the third way leaders are doing is right. Right, not least because they're supported by some elements on the right. So that would suggest that what they're doing is not all wrong. You are not arguing with the principles of what we're doing. You're not showing any area where our policies are failing. You're not looking to showing any area of the business community or the private sector who think that what we're doing is taking the wrong course. The many in the amongst the workers and the trade unions, they too support what we're doing. There is a very broad coalition for what we're doing, and you have not succeeded yet in identifying any area of policy where we are failing people. Yet at the same time, you're saying that the right have the answers, that the Conservatives are the better alternative. Tell me, what are the Conservatives offering that is better? What are their policies that are superior? What difference, really, would they make? What policies that are truly different from those that we're following would the Conservatives pursue if they were re-elected? I think that the differences are not very great, and I'll tell you why. Because what is determining, what is the sort of governing idea behind the third way is what works in the real world. That is the powerful idea. It is what is practical, it is what is intelligent, it is what is sensible, it is what is sophisticated. And that's why neither on the old left or on the conservative right have they yet found an alternative to the third way ideas that these leaders are pursuing.
Rui.
Eu lembro que, eu posso estar enganado quanto ao número, mas eu lembro que na campanha, uma das propostas do Blair era retirar do seguro-desemprego cerca de 250 mil jovens e fazê-los retornar ao mercado de trabalho. Queria saber o que é que foi feito, quais foram os resultados obtidos até hoje.
Yeah. When we came into office, we created what's called the New Deal program. It is a very expensive program, it's a very radical program, and it addresses the needs of the young and the long-term unemployed, people who've been unemployed for 12, 18 months and more. And it offers 4 options. Subsidized private sector work, a place in education and training, or a place doing working for a voluntary organization, or otherwise working for environmental improvement in the community. 4 options, and that's and giving people an income in order to support them as they join up on the New Deal. But we also place an obligation on those people to take up the option. You know, it's rights and responsibilities. It's not just saying to somebody, here you are, you know, here's some money, or here's the chance to do this. It's also saying you have a responsibility to put into society, to be a responsible citizen, and to take up the options that we are providing. And I think that, again, you know, is the modern third way. You know, the old left would have said, you know, you mustn't place any obligation on people. You mustn't force them to work. You mustn't force them to go on to education and training. And we're not forcing anyone to do anything. We're just saying that if we give you the chance and you reject it, then don't expect us to support you. The conservative right would never have had the imagination. They would never have had the social concern to set up the program in the first place. So there you see the old, the traditional values of the left being applied in a reformed and modern way through these new programs. And that is, I think, is the characteristic of most of what we're doing in this area of social policy and welfare reform.
Uma das fontes de recurso dos gastos na saúde e na educação no governo inglês tem sido anunciado como sendo o imposto sobre os ganhos extraordinários das empresas privatizadas.
Yeah.
Esses recursos, eu tenho entendido também, que se situariam na ordem de 6 bilhões de dólares. Eu gostaria de ter uma opinião sua sobre essa medida e de que maneira ela foi implementada.
Yeah. The once-off tax, and it won't be repeated, it's a single tax, which we introduced after the election, has been used to pay for the New Deal program for the young and the long-term unemployed that I was just describing. And the reason we did it is that when these public utilities were privatized, and incidentally, the public has benefited from that privatisation. I'm not making an argument about that. I mean, they are now run more efficiently, they have lower costs, they have greater investment, there's greater sensitivity to the public who depend on these services and on these utilities. So I'm not making an argument about that. But when they were privatised by the Conservatives, it was done in a way that gave a lot of profits for those who assumed their ownership. And what we said before the election is that those excess profits that were earned when these utilities were first privatised should, through taxation, a once-off tax, be brought back for the public good and used to finance the New Deal programme. And the privatised utilities accepted this. I mean, they didn't sort of jump for joy and say, great, Christmas has arrived, but they did accept that this was a reasonable thing to do, and having been elected on that platform, we have implemented that policy, and the privatised utilities have accepted it.
Ministro, como o senhor sabe, o Brasil e a Inglaterra têm situações muito diferentes. A nossa democracia aqui é muito jovem e sofreu muito nos últimos tempos. Ao mesmo tempo, em todas as declarações do primeiro-ministro Tony Blair e em todo o arcabouço aí desse novo trabalhismo, existe uma clara definição que diz o seguinte: nós não viemos aqui para fazer apenas um único mandato. O serviço que tem que ser feito na Grã-Bretanha é para longo prazo e os trabalhistas querem ficar por longo prazo no poder. Dadas as diferenças que existem entre o sistema político inglês e o brasileiro, quando a gente escuta isso aqui, de uma proposta que se diz muito parecida com a do governo Fernando Henrique, a gente de algum modo teme pela perspectiva de que não haja a renovação do poder. O senhor não acredita, pelo menos no caso da Inglaterra, que essa alternância de poder de algum modo é positiva, ou os conservadores vão ter que ficar na oposição o resto da vida?
No, but the sanction the public hold is the ballot box, is the election. You know, every 4 or 5 years there comes an election, and they can say, right, thank you very much, tick, I like what you're doing, and I prefer you to the alternative, so I'll re-elect you. Or they'll say, I'm very sorry, you haven't done what you promised, so I'm going to look to the alternative. That's a democratic right. But I think that there are two considerations that people have in their minds when they cast a vote. One is, do I trust these politicians? Are they honest? Do I think they have integrity? The second is, do they need more time in order to fulfill their programme? Not just because stability is good in itself, which of course it is, economic and political stability is very important for investment and employment, but also if we're really going to carry through the reforms that we want in modernising our economy, bringing our welfare system, our basic education, our health service into a state which really serves people, our programme of decentralising government and giving power back to the people, do we need more time to do that? I think in Britain, people will answer yes. I hope so, because I'm a member of the government. In Brazil, we'll wait and see.
Ok. Eu agradeço muito ao ministro Peter Mandelson, a nossa equipe aí de entrevistadores. Agradeço o acompanhamento de vocês aí pelo programa e informo que o Roda Viva, como todas as semanas, voltará na próxima segunda-feira, sempre às 10h30 da noite. Por isso, uma boa noite, uma boa semana e até lá.